Today we're going to be looking at soil health in the paddock and things that landowners can do themselves with commonly available equipment. So here we've got some tools that you can use to collect soil samples. Now this one you may not be able to find off the shelf, but you can order them online, and you may also be able to borrow it from your local landscape board's office. There's different forms, but it's a soil sampler, gets pushed into the ground, turn it, and you can then take out a small sample and put it in a bucket. And you do this 30 or 40 times and you've got enough to send off to the laboratory. And you would do this by walking across your whole paddock or your whole area of soil that you're interested in. Then you've got your post hole digger or auger, quite easy to use. Just place and turn. Slow, but you can get to a reasonable depth with that as long as you've got reasonably soft soil. And finally, everyone should have one of these. Good spade, flat across the end because we want to get an even depth and strong enough to do what we want. Also useful, a little bit of tarp or plastic just to put your soil sample on as it comes out, and a bucket to put your samples in as you collect them. Okay, so using a soil sampler, you would pick your spot in the paddock that's typical of the whole thing. So I'm going to go from here straight across, and I push it into the ground to the right depth, take my sample, shake it in the bucket, and I'm going to go across and do this about 40 times to collect 500 grams of soil. If you're doing this on a heavier soil type, you might need to take a screwdriver or a little bit of metal or rod to scrape the soil out of the sampler if it's a bit harder. 37. Notice I'm zigzagging a little bit so that I'm not just walking along one row. 40. And while I'm doing it, I notice how hard or how soft the ground is as I push the sampler in, what plants there are around the place, and whether those plants, whether they be crop or pasture or weed species, what those can tell me about the soil. So if you don't have access to a soil sampler, or you might want to be taking a larger number of soil samples or deeper soil samples, then what you've usually got available is a spade or an auger or post hole digger. They both work pretty much the same way, so I'll demonstrate with the spade. So here we have our spade. Dig down to the depth that you want. Here's where your ruler comes in handy, because if you're sampling for a 10 centimetre depth for a specific reason, like nutrient sampling, you do need it to be 10 centimetres deep. The soil right at the surface of the soil is more fertile than what's underneath, so in order for you to know what's along the whole of the 10 centimetres, you need nice even sample 10 centimetres deep all the way down. Okay, so we've got our 10 centimetre deep and we've got a nice smooth face there that's not contaminated with anything. Now I scrape back a little bit if there's too much on the surface, because you don't want to pick up, too much stubble or chaff or whatever. Then nice straight down, get yourself a nice even slice of soil all the way along. That's pretty even all the way down, and pop it in your bucket. And you would want to do that 10 to 20 times across the area that you're sampling, depending on the size of it. You'll get more soil than you need, but you need to get a nice representative sample, because if you only take one or two on the area that, say, had a bit of flooding or that the animals have been camping on at night, that won't be typical of the area. You want to select the spots that are as normal as possible across the paddock. For our samples, we can pick out any large roots. If there were any stones in there, we would be able to take those out, but small stuff can stay there. Anything that's larger than about 2 millimeters gets sieved out. Okay, so I've got my soil sample in my bucket. I'll just stir it around a little bit so it's well mixed. We then put that in a labelled sandwich bag. Very important to label it so that later on you know where it came from and the lab knows who it belongs to. So there we go. That's a imaginary landowner paddock labelled with the paddock and also the depth if you're doing more than one depth. So in this case, we've taken the top 10 centimetres. Then we half fill our bag, which is about 500 grams, because that's how much the lab needs for usual testing. So here's our bag. Squeeze the air out of it and seal it. And then, if you're sending it by post, you want to be extra safe. So put it inside another bag so that it's double bagged, because you really don't want your sample bag breaking open and then you get your samples mixed up with something else or lost.